In the history of American country music, very few people have risen so slowly, and even fewer have stepped down with such silence. Randy Owen rose from nothing. No backing, no Nashville machine behind him. Nearly 10 years playing bar rooms, facing rejection, dismissed as not marketable. Then one day, before anyone could fully grasp what was happening, that voice suddenly took over America. Radio played him every day. Stadiums sold out. Awards stacked up. Alabama became a name no one could escape. That is the rise everyone wants to tell. But there is another part of the story that is often left out. After standing at the top for long enough, Randy Owen began to pay a price. Not through scandal, not through collapse, but through quieter things. Exhaustion, illness, and the growing sense that if he continued, he would lose himself before he ever lost his audience. And so, while the world was still demanding more, he chose deliberately to step away from the center of the spotlight. This story is about a long and grueling climb upward, and about a rare moment when someone who has reached the very peak dares to step back. No noise, no public tragedy, just a decision cold enough to change the rest of a life. Randy Owen was born in the winter of 1949 in Fort Payne, Alabama, a town so small that if you took a wrong turn, you could pass through it without ever realizing you had been there. It was not a place that nurtured dreams. It nurtured endurance. Adults left for work before sunrise. Children learned the value of silence early on, and music, if it existed at all, came only from church pews or an old radio sitting in the corner of the kitchen. When Randy was still very young in the early 1950s, his family fell apart. His parents' divorce was quiet, without drama, but it left a hollow space that would linger for years. For a Southern child of that era, divorce was more than the loss of a family. It was the feeling of being shifted out of the world's natural order. Randy did not rebel. He learned to retreat inward, to observe more than he spoke, and to keep everything contained inside himself. Music found him during that very period. The hymns sung in church, the country songs drifting from the radio in the late 1950s and early 1960s, and the first guitar Randy ever touched was not a form of entertainment. It was more like an anchor, something that kept him steady when everything else threatened to drift away. He did not learn music to stand out. He learned it to remain, to keep himself from being swept away from the life he was living. By the late 1960s, when many young people were beginning to dream of big cities, Randy Owen chose the opposite path. He wrote his first songs slowly, honestly, as if he were recording his own life rather than composing music. There was no ambition to become a star, only a deeper need to stand on his own feet. Music gave him the consistency his childhood had lacked, something that did not leave, did not change, did not demand. And that is why Randy Owen's drive to rise was never about surpassing anyone else. It came from a fear of being left behind, of slipping out of his own life, and from Fort Payne, with an old guitar and a voice that refused to show off, he began to move forward, slowly, quietly, but with a steadiness strong enough that years later, when the stage lights finally exploded around him, he would still remember exactly where he came from and why he began. When Randy Owen left Fort Payne in the early 1970s, he did not carry a blueprint for fame. The only things that felt real were a guitar, a handful of unfinished songs, and a fragile belief that if he kept moving, music would not abandon him. Nashville was still far away, not just geographically, but in terms of belonging. Randy understood that, so he chose the long way around. to travel for a long time before ever reaching the place he was meant to go. Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, became the stop along the way. There stood the Bowery, a small, noisy bar where the band Alabama played night after night. Not to be remembered, but to learn how to stay upright on stage when no one was truly listening. The shows were long, the crowds constantly changing, and the music had to keep the room alive. Randy learned an essential lesson. If you can't hold an audience in a loud bar, you won't hold them anywhere. Through the middle of the 1970s, Alabama lived inside a grinding loop. Perform, record, send tapes, get rejected. Nashville didn't know where to place them. Too rock to be pure country, too country to be pop. Caught in between, Randy refused to change his voice. He sang the way he lived, restrained, story-driven, never pleading. That refusal to compromise made the doors open more slowly, but it also kept the road ahead from becoming distorted. These years offered no explosive moments, only the steady erosion of time. Every night on stage was another act of discipline, keeping the band tight, keeping the emotion intact, keeping himself from giving up. Randy did not treat rejection as failure. It was simply a sign that the moment had not yet arrived. And if the moment hadn't come, there was only one thing to do: keep going. By the late 1970s, just as the last opportunity seemed about to slip away, Alabama signed a small deal, just enough to step through a door they had been knocking on for years. When Tennessee River hit the airwaves in 1980, it didn't feel like a shock. It felt like a truth that had arrived late. That voice had been ready for a long time, simply waiting for others to listen. Those wandering years without lights taught Randy Owen how to rise without losing himself. And because he had traveled so far in the dark, when the light finally came on, he knew exactly where to stand, so it would not consume him. As 1980 arrived, everything changed direction so quickly that even Randy Owen himself had little time to prepare. Tennessee River hit the radio and spread with an almost irresistible force. No gimmicks, no shock tactics, just a deep, steady voice telling Southern stories in a language listeners instantly recognized. This is someone like me. Then the songs kept coming. Mountain music, Feels So Right, Dixieland Delight. If You're Gonna Play in Texas, each one was more than a hit. It was a slice of everyday life. Alabama moved rapidly from small bars to massive stages, where tens of thousands of people sang along to every word. Under Randy Owen's voice, country music was no longer regional. It became the soundtrack of America throughout the 1980s. What made it extraordinary was this. In the middle of the storm, Randy Owen did not change. He did not speak more. He did not perform more. He did not try to turn himself into an icon. While Alabama collected awards year after year and topped the charts at a pace almost unheard of, Randy kept the bearing of a Southern man, standing straight, singing just enough, and leaving the stage when the song was over. No promises, no declarations. That restraint is what set his peak apart. Alabama's success was not built on a short-lived explosion, but on trust. Audiences trusted that every song Randy Owen sang was real. Radio trusted that his voice would never betray the listener. And the industry was forced to accept a simple truth. Country music could be modern, could be mainstream, without losing its soul. By the middle and late 1980s, Alabama wasn't just dominating the charts. They were redefining what success looked like. And at the center of it all, Randy Owen stood firm. Not because of ambition, but because he had never climbed to the top with the intention of staying there forever. In the years when he stood at the very center of American country music, Randy Owen lived a life that ran entirely counter to his image on stage. When the show ended, he didn't linger. No parties, no gatherings. He left early, went home, and kept a deliberate distance from the fame he carried. His marriage to Kelly Owen, which began in 1975, became the most stable element of that life. Quiet, unexposed, built on steady presence rather than display. Long tours, gaps in daily routines, the things left unsaid, all of it accumulated into a rhythm of living that was uniquely theirs, where endurance mattered more than romance. The greater his success became, the more Randy Owen withdrew. He did not turn to alcohol. He did not escape through easy outlets. He chose silence, a disciplined silence, enough to shield him from the noise outside, but also enough to slowly push the world at a distance. He continued to complete every tour, continued to step on stage with the same composed manner, but the life behind the curtain had shifted. There were nights when, after the final applause faded, the exhaustion did not leave with the lights. It stayed, quietly. It caused no crisis, broke nothing, but it carried a persistent reminder. Even long-held stability can come with its own weight. And within that prolonged quiet, the first limits began to surface. Not from the outside world, but from within a man who had grown accustomed to carrying everything on his own. There came a point when Randy Owen no longer needed dramatic signs to understand that he had to slow down. No scandal, no public collapse. Just his body beginning to say what he had quietly avoided for years. By the early 2010s, while the stage lights were still burning and the tour schedule remained full, he received a diagnosis of prostate cancer. The news was not announced loudly, no press conference, no inspirational narrative. Randy chose the path he knew best, handling it in silence. Treatment unfolded quietly. Performances became less frequent. Life was broken into smaller segments, by hospital appointments, by accumulated fatigue. He did not turn illness into a message. He did not use it to pull attention back toward himself. For Randy Owen, this was not a time to speak. It was a time to listen inward. When the illness came under control, what remained was not fear, but a new clarity. If he continued living as before, the cost would be more than his health. His withdrawal, therefore, did not resemble defeat. It felt like a deliberate decision made by someone who had gone too far to keep pretending he could not see the limits. Randy never announced a retirement. He simply began to reduce his presence. Alabama still appeared, but no longer at the center of everything. Tribute tours replaced endless road schedules. The stage became a place to visit, no longer a place to stay. During this period, Randy Owen learned how to live with absence, something that frightens many others. No nightly applause, no packed calendar, but also no longer the feeling of being stretched thin between fame and private life. He accepted a new reality. Stepping back does not mean disappearing. It simply means no longer standing in the brightest light. This turning point did not end Randy Owen's career. It reshaped the remainder of his life, where presence became selective and silence was no longer a defense, but a way of being. As life slowed, Randy Owen made no attempt to write another loud chapter in his career. He allowed time to do what the spotlight never could, refine. And in that quiet space, his legacy came into sharper focus than ever before. That legacy is not found only in numbers. The charts Alabama once dominated or the awards handed out amid prolonged applause. It lives in the way Randy Owen reshaped public expectations of what a country artist could be. He proved that country music could be modern without losing its roots, mainstream without surrendering its honesty. That warm, grounded voice never sought to impress. It built trust. And trust, once established, outlasts every trend. Randy Owen's influence spread in a quiet way. Many artists who followed learned from him not showmanship, but the discipline of restraint, telling stories instead of showing off, standing firm rather than chasing the light. He left behind a rare template in the entertainment industry, one where success does not demand the sacrifice of private life, and endurance is valued over explosive moments. When Alabama was honored in halls of fame, it was not an ending, but a belated acknowledgement of a path that had been right from the very beginning. Randy Owen did not leave behind a flawless legend. He left behind a way of working, measured, truthful, and independent of noise. When the final sound fades, what remains is not the echo of the stage, but the familiar feeling his voice once carried, that you were being told a true story. And for many, that alone is enough for Randy Owen to remain a lasting part of America's musical memory. In the present day, Randy Owen does not return to prove anything. He appears less often, more selectively, and always at the right moment. The exhausting, never-ending tours are gone. In their place are reunions and tribute stages, settings where music is restored to its proper role, a meeting, not a race. Randy Owen lives slowly now. He gives his time to family, to home, to days without schedules. His renewal does not come from returning to the top, but from reclaiming his rhythm of life. When he sings today, he does not try to recreate youth. His voice carries the weight of time, less showy, but deeper. Familiar songs return as quiet confirmations that the music is still there, even when the artist is no longer at the center of the light. In rare moments of reflection, Randy speaks about music with calm restraint. He does not talk about records. He talks about responsibility. Responsibility to the stories entrusted to him and to the people who have listened for decades. It is a simple philosophy. Do what matters, even when no one is watching. Randy Owen's renewal, therefore, is not loud. It unfolds in very small moments, a carefully chosen performance, a song sung more slowly, a decision to stop at the right time. There's no longer a need to be everywhere, only to be in the right place. And in that choice, he finds a sense of lightness, not because he has left the stage behind, but because he has placed himself alongside life itself. When life slowed for long enough, Randy Owen began to see what had always been hidden behind tour schedules and stage lights. Not moments of glory, they were already familiar, but the spaces between them. Evenings spent away from home, days that passed too quickly to notice just how tired he had become. Randy Owen does not retell his life with regret, nor does he try to revise memory. What has passed, he leaves where it is. But when he was no longer carried by the relentless pace of success, the cost of climbing for so long became clearer. Success does not take things away all at once. It erodes slowly, steadily, and almost invisibly while you are still inside the motion. Rather than searching for grand answers, Randy Owen chose to observe how his body responds to quiet, to observe how music changes when it no longer bears expectation, and to observe himself, a man who spent most of his life before crowds, now learning how to remain still without feeling empty. These reflections did not turn him into someone else. They simply sharpened what was already there. There are times when you must move fast to avoid being left behind. And there are moments when the most important thing is not losing yourself along the way. For Randy Owen, The aftermath is not about judging right or wrong. It is the moment a man understands that some things only reveal themselves when you stop trying to become someone. And from that understanding, the rest of life begins to carry real weight. In the end, Randy Owen's story does not conclude with a farewell concert, nor does it close with waves of prolonged applause. It ends the way he lived most of his life, quietly and complete. Randy Owen does not leave behind the image of an artist clinging to the spotlight. He leaves behind the image of a man who knew who he was, knew where he came from, and knew when it was time to stop. His climb was long, slow, and filled with sweat, but his descent, if it can even be called that, was a clear-minded choice, free of panic, free of regret. When that voice no longer plays every day on the radio, it does not disappear. It remains in the memories of those who once listened and saw themselves reflected in those simple lines. It remains in the way country music learned that being mainstream does not mean losing its soul. And it remains in a rare standard. Success does not have to destroy the person behind it. Randy Owen does not need to be called a legend. Perhaps because what he left behind goes beyond any title. A voice that once spoke for an entire generation, then chose silence when there was nothing left to prove. Sometimes, that is the most complete ending an artistic life can have. And perhaps, somewhere within this story, each of us holds on to a very personal moment. A song playing on an old radio, a long drive down an open road, or an evening when Alabama's voice said what we could not put into words. Those memories do not need to be named. They only need to remain. If a memory like that ever moved you, share your feelings in the comments below. And if you want stories about voices that were never loud, yet live on for a very long time in the hearts of listeners, please like and subscribe, so that not only Randy Owen's voice, but an entire generation of country legends can continue to be heard, quietly, enduringly, and never forgotten. See you in the next video.